There is a version of this story that goes like this. A teenager from suburban Chicago drops out of college, founds a nonprofit, and spends the next decade reshaping how young Americans think about politics. He builds one of the largest conservative youth organizations in United States history. He becomes an influential voice in Republican youth outreach during multiple presidential cycles. And then, in September of 2025, on a campus in Utah, he is killed. That version is accurate. Every word of it is true. But it leaves out almost everything interesting. I am Vanessa Clark. This is Clark on Record, Charlie Kirk Biography Forever. And today, we are going to look at the full picture. The methods, the money, the movement, and the question nobody has a clean answer to yet. What happens to an empire built around the single person when that person is gone? This story is bigger than the headlines, bigger than the controversy, bigger than the eulogy, and it is not finished. So, let us dig deeper. Charlie Kirk was born on October 4th, 1993, in Arlington Heights, Illinois. According to early biographical reporting, his father worked in construction and real estate development. His mother has been described in some accounts as having worked in futures trading before moving into a different career. He grew up in a politically conservative household, in a region that tilted decidedly the other direction. He described the experience of being the isolated young conservative as formative, not traumatic, but galvanizing. The sense of being a dissenting voice in a room that did not welcome dissent. When college admission time came, Kirk applied to West Point. He was not accepted. Accounts of exactly what happened differ. What is not disputed is that he chose not to pursue traditional college enrollment at all, and that decision, whether it came from conviction or circumstance or both, became the foundation of everything he built next. In 2012, when Kirk was 18 years old, he co-founded Turning Point USA with a businessman named Bill Montgomery. The organizational premise was precise. The conservative student was an underdog on American campuses, systematically outgunned by progressive organizing that had decades of infrastructure behind it. Kirk's solution was not to argue against that infrastructure, but to build an equivalent one from scratch. The initial years were slow. Fundraising was difficult. The chapter model, autonomous student-led groups operating under a central brand and receiving training and materials from headquarters, took time to prove itself. But Kirk understood something about political media that older strategists often missed. Controversy is a promotional tool if you can survive it. The Professor Watch List, launched in 2016, cataloged college instructors accused of liberal bias. The immediate response was outrage. Publications ran critical pieces. Kirk was condemned by faculty organizations and student groups alike. He went on television to defend it. Traffic to the Turning Point USA website surged. Donations followed. The playbook was established. To understand what Charlie Kirk actually built, you have to look past the media persona and examine the operational structure underneath it. Because Turning Point USA at its peak was not a personality cult. It was a functioning organization with sophisticated infrastructure. Tyler Bowyer served as chief operating officer. While Kirk was traveling to campuses, recording podcast episodes, and appearing on national television, Bowyer was managing the actual operations, staff, logistics, finances, compliance. Andrew Colvett handled media relations and external messaging. The board structure provided governance and donor oversight. The chapter model was the engine. Turning Point USA claimed a presence on over 3,500 campuses, with approximately 250,000 student members and 450 staff. Figures the organization itself reported and that have not been independently audited. Whatever the precise count, the scale was real and documented through on-the-ground reporting across multiple states. Recruitment tactics and messaging discipline were built into onboarding. Chapters competed for recognition and resources. The events program was equally deliberate. America Fest, the organization's annual conference, functioned as both a fundraising mechanism and a proof of concept. evidence that conservative youth organizing could generate the kind of enthusiasm and attendance that progressives had long claimed as their territory. Speaker rosters included major Republican figures. The atmosphere was designed to feel like a movement, not a seminar. The prove me wrong format, Kirk or a surrogate, seated at a folding table on campus, willing to debate any student who approached, generated enormous social media content. It was confrontational by design. The goal was not to change the minds of the students in the debate, but to create compelling footage for audiences watching online. The content was engineered for virality. Here is the part of this story that is genuinely difficult to evaluate without partisan bias. So I am going to give you the data and let you draw your own conclusions. Between the 2020 election and the 2024 election, the youth vote in the United States shifted meaningfully toward Republican candidates. The shift was not uniform across every demographic subset, and analysts disagree about the precise causes. But the data exists, and it coincides with a period in which Turning Point USA was operating at maximum reach. Kirk claimed direct credit. He pointed to the chapter network, the social media footprint, the campus presence. He argued that years of systematic outreach had moved a generation of voters. Critics argued the correlation was exactly that, correlation, and that broader cultural forces, economic anxiety, and dissatisfaction with the Democratic establishment deserved equal credit. What I can tell you with confidence is this: Turning Point USA had access, real access. The organization was consulted during the 2024 campaign. Kirk maintained a direct relationship with Donald Trump over more than a decade. The chapter network was activated as a ground game resource. These are not hypothetical claims. These are documented connections. Whether that access translated into the specific electoral shifts Kirk claimed is a harder argument. But the fact that those conversations were happening, that is not a small thing. Kirk married Erica Francie in 2021. They had met 2 years earlier. Their relationship was publicly framed within Kirk's broader Christian faith identity, and that framing was not incidental. Faith had become central to his public messaging in the years following the 2020 election. He positioned himself not just as a political operator, but as a defender of Christian values in a secularizing culture. They had 2 children. Kirk kept their names private throughout his life, a deliberate choice in an era when public figures' families were routinely drawn into political discourse. It was one of the few areas where his private and public selves operated by different rules. His podcast, The Charlie Kirk Show, was consistently among the most downloaded conservative programs in the country. He produced episodes at a rate that suggested either extraordinary discipline or an extraordinary operation behind the scenes, probably both. The podcast gave him a daily direct channel to his audience that bypassed traditional media gatekeepers entirely. The controversies were real and numerous. Critics documented a range of statements that they argued crossed from provocative commentary into inflammatory territory. Anti-Semitism accusations circulated, though Kirk consistently rejected them. His relationship with figures at the further edges of the conservative movement raised questions about where he drew lines. What is interesting, in retrospect, is how little any individual controversies seemed to affect the organization's trajectory. Each one generated negative coverage, followed by defensive statements, followed by fundraising spikes. The pattern repeated often enough that it stopped looking like misfortune and started looking like strategy. On September 10, 2025, Charlie Kirk was shot and killed at Utah Valley University in Orem, Utah. He was 31 years old. He was there for a campus event, the kind of event he had done hundreds of times at universities across the country as part of what had been billed as the American Comeback Tour. A suspect was taken into custody. Charging decisions and the status of any prosecution are subject to ongoing legal proceedings, and anyone following this story should consult current reporting for the latest court developments. As for motive, investigators had not publicly confirmed one at the time of this production. What followed in the immediate aftermath was a collision of grief and politics that would have been extraordinary for any public figure, and was, for someone of Kirk's specific role in the conservative movement, something else entirely. The response from Republican elected officials was swift and public. J.D. Vance, serving as vice president, issued a statement within hours. The statement connected Kirk's memory to the ongoing project of American conservatism. It was, by any honest reading, both an expression of genuine loss and a political calculation made in real time. Donations to Turning Point USA surged. Membership inquiries increased. The organization that had been built around one person's charisma was, in the immediate aftermath of his death, drawing energy from his absence. The provocateur's ultimate provocation. Erica Kirk gave a public address following her husband's death that became one of the most shared clips of that week. She said, and I am paraphrasing the tone here, not the exact words, that whoever had done this had no idea what they had started. That the cries of this widow would echo around the world like a battle cry. She became CEO of Turning Point USA. Now, here is where I want to be careful, because this is the part of the story that is still being written. And I do not want to tell you what to think about something that does not have an ending yet. My first pass through this story, I framed Erica's succession as primarily symbolic, the widow carrying forward the legacy. I think that framing was reductive, actually. She had been active in conservative media circles independently of her husband. She had her own podcast. She had established relationships with donors and political figures. She was not starting from zero. What she is navigating is something very specific and very difficult. Movements built around a single charismatic founder almost always face an identity crisis when that founder is gone. Sometimes they calcify around the memory and stop growing. Sometimes the absence creates space for new energy. Sometimes they fracture. The alliance between Turning Point USA under Erica Kirk and Vice President Vance reads, from the outside, as a dynastic move, one that benefits both parties. She gets governmental access. He gets direct connection to a deeply loyal base that is still processing loss and looking for direction. Whether that alliance produces lasting political results is the question that cannot be answered yet. Here is what I think can be said with confidence about Charlie Kirk's legacy, based on the record rather than on political preference. He helped demonstrate the political reach of youth organizing infrastructure. That is not a hypothetical claim. The data on young voter behavior between 2020 and 2024 is real. The infrastructure Kirk built to reach those voters is documented. The impact of that infrastructure, contested in its precise scope, is taken seriously by political scientists on both sides of the ideological divide. He demonstrated that controversy, deployed correctly, could substitute for traditional media access. The organizations that tried to ignore him made him more powerful. The ones that argued with him on his terms gave him platforms. The lesson was absorbed by a generation of conservative communicators who came after him. He built something that outlasted him, at least in the short term. The chapter network still exists. The donor relationships still exist. The brand still carries weight with the audience it was built for. Whether it can sustain itself without the specific energy he brought to it is genuinely unknown. And he left behind a set of unanswered questions that will define conservative politics for years. How extreme is too extreme for a coalition that needs to win general elections? Where does populism end and something harder to defend begin? Can a movement built on provocation find a governing posture that does not cannibalize itself? These are not questions unique to Turning Point USA. They are the defining questions of American conservatism right now. Charlie Kirk did not create them, but he shaped the terms of the debate, and the terms he established are not going away. I said at the start that the version of the story most people carry is accurate but incomplete. I hope this has added some of what was missing. Charlie Kirk was not a simple figure. He was not a saint, and he was not a cartoon villain. He was a person who understood a specific moment in American political culture with unusual clarity and built something large and fast and effective around that understanding. What that something ultimately adds up to is still being determined. The cries of that widow may echo for a long time. What they produce politically, organizationally, culturally, is a story that is still in the first act. I will be watching it closely. I am Vanessa Clark. This is Clark on Record.
Brought to you by Inception Point AI. Subscribe, like, and comment for more.